Drowning in the Mississippi after the riverboat burned, a Lakota chief swam to her and stayed. The river smelled of charred wood and something sweeter underneath it, like scorched sugar. And I remember thinking that was the last thing my nose would ever find before the current folded me under. That was the fall of 1,874. I was 41 years old, and I had nothing left to drown with me. They tell you water is cold in November. I knew cold. I had ridden out blizzards on the high plains with a single blanket and a horse pressed against my back. What the Mississippi gave me that night was not cold exactly. It was a weight, a slow pressing down from every direction at once. Like the river had decided to consider me and found me wanting, and it was making up its mind whether to keep me. I had swallowed a mouthful of it by the time I heard the boards cracking and felt the heat on my back from where the paddle wheel had gone up, and I had swallowed 2 more mouthfuls before I understood that I was swimming, or trying to, and that the shore I could just barely see through the smoke and the dark was farther than it looked. I want to tell you this plain. I am not a man who talks about himself easily, and I have told almost none of this to anyone who is still living. But I am old now, and the things a man carries in silence have a way of getting heavier the older he gets. And I figure I have been carrying this particular thing long enough. My name is Chayton. That is what my mother called me. The whites on the river called me something easier for their tongues, and I let them, because by then I had learned that what white men call you does not change what you are. I was born Oglala Lakota, and I died Oglala Lakota. And the river did not know or care about either of those things. It just had me, and it was working. I had come south because there was nowhere else to go. That is not a thing I could have said aloud in 1874 without feeling the shame of it turn my stomach. But it is the truth. The life I had been, the thing I had spent 40 years becoming, had come apart in pieces over the 2 years before the river, and by the time I boarded that paddle wheeler in Memphis with a saddlebag I owned, and $16 I had earned, loading cotton bales. I was not a chief. I was a man on a boat heading south, because south was the direction the boat was going. My father had been a man the other men listened to. Quiet, specific, economical with words, the way a man is economical with water. In dry country, only what is needed, nothing wasted. He taught me the same. He said, "A chief is not a man who shouts. A chief is a man other men grow still for." I was 19 when they came to me and said I was that man, and I believed them. And for 20 years, I tried to be what my father was. And I think I was. Some of it. Enough of it. But the world my father had taught me to lead did not exist by the time I was 40. It had been coming apart for years, and I had watched it, the way you watch a fire from too far away. You can see the shape of the destruction, the direction it's moving, but you cannot get there fast enough, and you cannot stop it when you do. The land went first, then the buffalo, in a way that still does not make sense to me when I think about it. How do you remove a thing that vast from the earth? How do you reduce a living darkness that shook the ground to a scatter of bones and a smell on the wind? But they did it. And with the buffalo went the reason for most of what we did and were and organized ourselves to be. And what was left was camps and rations, and men who had been warriors sitting with their hands on their knees, and I was supposed to lead that. I was supposed to find a path through a country that had been replaced with something else while we were standing on it. I tried. I want you to know that. I negotiated, and I argued, and I rode to the agency, and I rode back, and I said what I believed, and I fought where I could fight, and I bent where I could not. I kept my people fed through one winter that should have killed a third of them, and didn't because I had learned enough about the whites' trading system to work it. And that knowledge cost me something I cannot name precisely. Some piece of the man my father taught me to be. But I paid it. The children lived. That is what I traded it for. And then they moved us anyway. To land farther north, worse land. Rock and scrub and wind that came off the ridges like it was angry. And I stood in front of the man from the bureau and I said the words I had, and he wrote something in his ledger, and that was the end of that conversation. And of the 41 years of my life, I had spent becoming someone who could have that conversation and mean it. I left that same week. I told myself I was going to find something, some argument or ally or path I had missed, and maybe I believed that. I walked until I found horses, and I traded for one, and rode east. I do not remember most of what happened in the 6 months after that. I remember Memphis, and I remember the cotton bales, and the $16, and I remember the way the paddle wheeler looked in the dark before I got on it, lit up like something from a story, the water underneath it black and wide. The fire started in the engine room, they said later. I do not know about that. What I know is that I was on the main deck, sitting against the rail with my back to the river, watching the lights of the far shore, and the sound that woke me from the half-sleep I'd fallen into was not an explosion but a series of smaller sounds. A crack, a hiss, a shout cut short, and then the smell. By the time I was on my feet, the smoke was coming up through the deck boards in thin fingers, and people were moving around me the way water moves around rocks, fast and unthinking. I did not panic. That is not something I say to sound brave. It is just that by that point, I had been so low for so long that fear had used itself up in me. I looked at the fire coming up through the boards, and I looked at the water over the rail, and I made the only calculation available, and I went over the side. The river took me immediately. It did not give me a moment to think or orient. The current was fast that time of year, and the smoke behind me confused which way was which, and I swam, because that is what you do when you are in water. But I could not tell you for certain that I swam toward shore, and not sideways along it, or even downstream, away from everything. I swam. My boots were pulling at me. My coat had gone heavy in the first second. I got one boot off and lost the other trying, and the asymmetry of it, one foot free and one dragging, made me list and go under twice before I got my balance. I was a strong swimmer. I had crossed rivers on horseback and without horses for 40 years. But the Mississippi is not a river, in the way that prairie rivers are rivers. It is a country of water, wide and opinionated. And it has moods, and it had a mood that night. And the mood was not charitable. I went under a third time and came up farther downstream than I expected. And when I looked toward where the shore should have been, there was nothing but dark. The fire on the boat behind me was the brightest thing in the world, and it was getting smaller. I was moving away from it faster than I was moving toward land. I knew what that meant. I had known men who drowned. It is not a fight that goes on long. I stopped fighting for a moment. That is what I am trying to tell you. Not that I chose to die, I did not choose anything. I simply stopped moving, and the river held me up for a moment the way it does, the way water will suspend a thing that gives up fighting it. And I looked up at the sky, which was clear and cold and full of stars the way the sky gets in November when all the warmth has left the air. And I thought, this is not the worst place. This is not the worst place to end. And then a light hit me in the face, not a warm light, a lantern, swinging. And a voice, a woman's voice, low and specific and not panicked in the least, said, "Stop sinking, if you can manage it. I've only got the one rope." Her name was Delia Foss. She had a flat-bottomed skiff, the kind used for fishing the margins. And she had been out on the river before the fire, checking her trout lines in the dark, the way she apparently did every few nights. And she had seen the paddle wheel go up and rowed toward it. Not because she thought she could help, but because she is the kind of woman who rows toward things. She threw the rope, and I caught it. Or my hands found it, which is close enough. She hauled me alongside her skiff, and the way she did it without theater, without wasted motion, without the rope slipping once I knew she had done physical work her whole life. I got one arm over the gunwale, and she grabbed my collar with one hand, and the waistband of my trousers with the other, and she pulled, and I went up and over the side and into the bottom of the boat and lay there shaking, and she said nothing. She just shipped the oars and started rowing toward shore. I lay in the bottom of her skiff for what I think was 10 minutes. She rowed, and I shook. At some point she pulled a canvas from somewhere under the seat and dropped it over me without stopping rowing. It smelled of fish and wood smoke, and it was the finest thing I had been under in a very long time. When we hit the bank, she did not wait for me to recover my dignity before tying up. She wrapped the bowline around a root, and then she stood in the boat and looked at me in the lantern light, and she said, "Can you walk?" I said I could. She said, "House is 50 yards up. There's a fire in it." I got up, and I walked. I was aware of how I must have looked, a soaking Lakota man a decade past his prime. One boot on and one gone. River weed in his hair, and I was aware that I did not care, which was a new feeling, or an old feeling I had forgotten. I had been carrying the weight of what other men saw when they looked at me for long enough that the absence of it felt strange. I walked behind her, and she did not look back to see if I was following, which I understood was courtesy, not indifference. The house was a farmhouse, low and long, with a dog on the porch that raised its head and put it down again. Inside there was a fire in the hearth and a table and a shelf of things and a general tidiness that is different from neatness, not arranged to look kept but arranged to be useful, which is something I recognize. She had lived alone here for a while. I could tell by the specific placement of everything, the way a single person puts things exactly where they need them to be, without considering anyone else's reach. She gestured at the hearth. "Get close to that." I did. She disappeared somewhere behind me and came back with a wool blanket and put it around my shoulders, and then she put a pot on the fire, and I sat, and the shaking began to leave me by degrees, the way cold leaves, slowly and all at once. She sat across the fire from me. She was somewhere in her 30s, I thought, though I was not good at guessing white women's ages. Her face was weathered, a farming face, the kind the sun gets at over years. Her eyes were a color that was either gray or green, depending on what the light was doing. She had her hair loose, and it was dark, and it was still damp in places from the river spray, and she watched me across the fire with a directness that was not rude. It was more like the directness of someone who does not have the time or inclination to pretend she is not looking at what is in front of her. "Chayton," I said, when the silence had gone long enough. "Delia Foss," she said. "Were you the only one?" I told her I did not know. I had not seen anyone else go over. She nodded, like that was a kind of answer. "Were you trying to swim to shore, or just away from the fire?" she asked. "Shore," I said. "I think. Current runs hard here in November," she said. There was no cruelty in that. It was just information. I appreciated that more than I could have told her. I slept on the floor of her house that night, wrapped in the blanket, and I slept without dreaming, which I had not done in longer than I could remember. The dreams had been bad for 2 years. Not the fire and violence kind of bad that men who have fought expect. The quiet kind. Dreams of ordinary things, my daughter, when she was small. The sound of a camp in the morning before anyone was fully awake. The particular smell of horses and sage and morning cooking fires that were worse than nightmares because they contained nothing terrible and nothing I could run from, just things that were gone. I woke when she did, which was before light. The fire had burned down to coals, and she was adding wood to it, and the dog was out, and the sky through the small window was the gray that comes just before the gray that comes before the light. She had made coffee, thick and bitter, and she set a cup beside me without waking me. And it was the warmth of the cup against my palm that woke me. She asked me nothing that morning. She made food, cornbread, and salt pork. Plain as the house, and she put a plate down, and she ate her own food. And the dog came back in, and settled by the fire, and outside. A bird said something once, and was quiet. I ate. I could not remember the last time I had eaten at a table, or sitting still, or in a house with a fire in it, and the not remembering landed on me, while I was sitting there with the tin plate on my knee, heavy as a stone. I did not cry. I want to make that clear. But something broke loose in me that morning. Some long-held thing. and it ran somewhere I couldn't see, and I sat very still for a moment, with the plate on my knee, and she looked at me across the table, and she did not say anything. She just looked at me, and in the looking there was nothing I had to explain. I stayed 3 more days. Each day she went out on the river in the morning, and I did not ask her why, and she did not offer it. By the second morning, I had made myself useful enough that she did not protest it. I split a cord of wood she had been putting off, and rehung a door that had been sticking, and mended a fence line on the east side of the intentions property where the post had rotted through. I did these things because it was what I knew to do. Because my hands without work are a liability to me. Always have been. I did them also because they were her things, and I was in the habit of keeping things that mattered to someone. She cooked. She did not cook the way women cook when they are trying to impress someone. She cooked the way she did everything, directly and without ceremony. And the food was good in the way that useful things are good. On the second evening, she told me about the farm. She had come down from Indiana with her husband 7 years ago, and he had died in the 3rd year of a thing that started as a fever and didn't stop. And she had stayed because she did not know what going back would mean. The farm was hers. The river was hers, in whatever way a river belongs to a person who lives beside it. I told her some of what I have told you. Not all of it. Some things I could not find the words for in English, and did not try. She listened the way I recognized, not waiting for her turn to speak, not nodding at intervals to show she was following, just still. The way my father was still when a man was saying something true. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I sat with that." "Maybe," I said. "Not maybe," she said. I watched my husband try to outwork a sickness. The working didn't have anything to do with the sickness. But he was a man who worked. So that's what he did. You're a man who leads. So that's what you did. I had been carrying a version of the story where I had failed. Where there was something a better man could have found. A door I had missed. She was not telling me that story was wrong. She was telling me it was beside the point. There is a difference between those two things, and I felt it. That night I did not sleep on the floor. She moved over, and I did not leave the room. That is as plainly as I can say it, and as plainly as it needs to be said. The 4th morning I told her I had to go. I said it at breakfast. Flat. The way you say a true thing. She said, "Where?" I said I did not know exactly. North, I thought. Back to my people, or what was left of them. To do what I did not know. But away from the river, away from the south, back toward the country that was mine even when it wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then she got up and started clearing the plates. I watched her back while she worked. Her shoulders, the economy of her motion, the unhurried way she moved through her own house. I had known a handful of women in my life, and I had loved one of them. My wife, who died in childbirth when I was 34, and I had told myself after that I was done with love, not because I was dramatic about it, but because it seemed like a plain accounting of what was left of me to give. I had work, and I had my people, and I had, eventually, not even those. I did not know what I had standing in Delia Foss's kitchen on a November morning, with my boots dried by the fire, and my coat mended where she had mended it while I slept. She turned around. She said, "I know you have to go. I'm not arguing that." She said it the way she said everything, directly, no preamble. "But I want you to know something first." I waited. "I have been on this farm for 4 years alone," she said. "And I have been fine. I do not need someone here. You understand that. I need you to understand that." I said I understood it. "What I'm saying," she said, "is that I want you to come back. That's different from needing. I'm telling you because you look like a man who has been told he is needed and then had that taken away. And I'm not offering you need. I'm offering you want. I'm offering you this place and this river and me in it. And I am doing that freely. And I am doing it because you are the man who came out of my river. and I have decided you are worth the wanting. The fire behind her was burning low, and the morning light was coming through the window. That flat November light that is not warm, but is honest. And she stood there in it, and looked at me, and I felt, for the first time in I could not count how many years, like someone had taken a true measure of me, and come back with a number they could use. I did not say anything for a moment. There was not a great deal to say. I picked up my hat from the table. I put it on. I walked to her, and I took her face in both my hands, and I looked at her, and she looked back at me, level and clear, not soft and not frightened, just sure. Sure, the way a post is sure when you have set it in good ground. I kissed her once, and I let her go. I'll come back in the spring, I said. She said, I know. I went north. I will not tell you all of what I found there, because some of it does not belong in this telling. My daughter was alive. That mattered more than anything. The people were alive, most of them, and they were still trying, still working in the incremental way that is the only way available when everything official is arranged against you. I stayed through the winter. I did not try to be chief again. I helped where I could help, and stepped back where I couldn't, and I did not pretend either of those things was more than what it was. I wrote Delia 3 letters. I do not know if they reached her. I had never been much for written English, and the words I had in that language were the words of negotiation. Not the other kind. But I tried. I told her about the winter, the cold. The way the light comes off the snow on the high plains in January, like something is burning underneath it. I told her my daughter's name. I told her I thought about the river. What I did not tell her was that I had started sleeping again, or that the dreams had changed. Not gone, but changed. Still lost, but mixed now with something else. Some image from her kitchen or the sound of the river at night through her walls. Something that put a floor under the falling. I did not know how to write that in English. I am not sure I know how to say it now. I came south again when the snow broke. I will not make a ceremony of it. I rode south, and I crossed 3 rivers, and I found the Mississippi, and I followed it. And in the 3rd week of April, I found her farm and her skiff at the bank, and her washing on the line, and the dog was on the porch, and it raised its head and put it down again, like I had only been gone the afternoon. She came to the door. She had flour on her hands, and she looked at me, and she did not say, I knew you would. She did not say anything for a moment. She dried her hands on her apron, and she walked out to where I had stopped my horse, and she put her hand flat on my horse's neck, and looked up at me, and the April light was in her eyes. That gray-green? And she said, Horse looks thin. Long road, I said. She said, Well, get down then. I got down. I tied the horse to the post, and I stood there for a moment. A little foolish, maybe. And she reached up without any ceremony and took my face the way I had taken hers in November. Both hands, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me in the lantern light in the river, with the rope in her hand, steady, considering. Decided. She kissed me once, brief and exact, and then she stepped back. There's food in an hour, she said. I could use that fence line on the north side looked at. Which post? I said. 3rd one from the cottonwood, she said. It's been leaning. I took the tools from where they were hanging in the barn like they had waited for me. I went, and I found the post, and I dug it out, and reset it, packing the earth around it, the way you pack it when you mean it to hold, and the sun was warm on my back. And the river was moving south beyond the tree line. And somewhere behind me, the house was making the sounds of a house, with someone in it. Not 2 someones yet, but working toward it. That post is set deeper than the ones around it. It's been almost 10 years now, and it hasn't moved. That is what I think about when I think about what she did for me. Not the rope, though the rope was everything. Not the floor and the fire and the food, though those mattered more than I could say. What I think about is that she looked at a man the river had finished, and she found something in him worth the keeping. Not out of pity. Not because she was soft, or desperate, or afraid of being alone. She had made her accounting, and she had come out in my favor, freely, and that is a thing a man can stand on for the rest of his life. Some men spend their whole lives waiting to be seen clearly, by someone who sees clearly. I know what it is to finally be that man. The river runs south. It does not stop. In November it looks black and it sounds like nothing, just a steady moving, and if you are in it, and it has you, it does not care. It is only doing what water does, which is to find the lowest place, and go there. I was in that water and I should not have come out of it. What I came out into was this: a woman who rowed toward the fire, and threw a rope, and decided, after looking at what she'd pulled from the river, that it was worth the keeping. She is 43 now and she still goes out on the river in the dark to check her trout lines, and I still lie awake until I hear the skiff come back. And when the bottom of the boat scrapes the bank, I close my eyes and let the sleep come. It comes easy now. That is not a small thing. For a man who went as long as I did without easy sleep, that is not a small thing at all. She is in the kitchen right now. I can hear her from out here on the porch. The dog is at my feet, and the sun is going down, and the river is doing what it does, and I am here. That is enough. That is exactly what is needed, and not a bit more. And it took a fire, and a river, and a rope, and a woman with her hands on the oars in the dark to get me here. And I am not going anywhere.